Well, today is Tuesday. It's December the 20th, 2022, and we are coming to today's Heart of a Shepherd. The title of the devotional is the question, is the Lord ashamed of you? Now, our scripture reading, Revelation chapter 3 and Revelation chapter 4, with a brief introduction. Our study of the revelations of John the Apostle, brings us today to, as I have said, Revelation 3 and 4, and the last three of the seven churches of Revelation. Now, our former devotion considered the churches at Ephesus in chapter 2, Smyrna, Pergamos, and Thyatira. Now, today's devotion will consider the church in Sardis, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, and we'll look forward to addressing the church in Philadelphia and Laodicea, all in chapter 3, in the future. But for today, our scripture focus is going to be Revelation 3, verses 1 through 6, and the church at Sardis. Well, let me give you a little bit of a background going into this. Now, as you read Revelation chapter 3, you're going to notice that the style and the format is very much like it was in chapter 2 of the previous four churches. Now, the churches named, you understand, were actual congregations in John's day. However, the letters addressed to them were prophetic in nature. In other words, the seven churches that we have seen in Revelation chapter 2 and now Revelation chapter 3 serve as types of future churches and congregations. Now, another similarity is seen in how each church was addressed, namely that an angel acted as the Lord's messenger. Now notice also the congregations were commended and affirmed for their virtues, and yet they were rebuked for tolerating sin. There's two exceptions to that, and one is Smyrna and the other is Philadelphia in chapter 3. Now let's notice the church in Sardis. Now the message of the angel concerning Sardis, a city that would have been in Turkey, our modern day Turkey, was this, chapter 3, verse 1. I know thy works, that thou hast a name that livest, and art dead. Living, but dead. What a tragic summation of a congregation that was busy about religion with its traditions while being totally unaware they were spiritually dead. The believers of Sardis were working, and yet they were condemned in chapter 3 and verse 2, where we read, I have not found thy works perfect before God. Is that not the case with many congregations today? You know, churches are busier than ever, big productions. But how many are busy living the truth? Let me give you a little lesson from history. Some scholars compare the church of Sardis with the church period we know as the Dark Ages, began around the 4th century A.D. Now, there are biblical historians who identify the works attributed to Sardis with the Roman Catholic Church. Catholicism, with its rituals, many of them derived from ancient paganism, traditions, and extra biblical teachings, drew the world of the 4th century into a millennium, 1,000 years of spiritual darkness. Now, that darkness veiled the world, particularly Western Europe, until it was challenged during a period known as the Reformation. The Reformation beginning around the 16th century. Now, the Reformation was used by God to slowly disperse the spiritual darkness of the Dark Ages. Now, while the majority of believers of Sardis were spiritually dead, as with the churches in the Dark Ages, there were a few who remained faithful. Now, those few, many of whom became martyrs, were said to have, and I quote, not defiled their garments. They shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy, we read in chapter 3 and verse 4. In other words, there were some, in spite of the great backsliding of the majority, there were some, a few, who did not defile themselves with sin. They were spiritual overcomers. victors. And the Lord promised in Revelation 3 and verse 5, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life. I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. What a wonderful statement. The Lord declared he would not be ashamed of the believer who kept himself unspotted by sin, and said of that believer, I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. And I close with a question. Can the same be said of you? Thank you for joining Art of a Shepherd. I encourage you, subscribe to this YouTube channel and also to heartofashepherd.com as we look at the beginning of a new year and the return to Genesis, January the 1st, 2023. God bless. Bye-bye.